That makes it even better. Okay, good evening, everyone. Let's go for it. Tonight's shir was dedicated by Shimon Lians in honor of his mom's second yard site, Josepha Bas Harold. May her soul have a great. No, Joyce. Is it Joyce or Josepha? What is it? It's either Joyce Bas Harold or Josepha Bas Harold, whichever one. May her soul have a great aliyah. Much blessing to you, Shimon. Okay, so this is a continuation. We're going to finish. There's a short part of the mimer left from what we've learned in the last 2 weeks regarding Moshe striking the rock. I didn't prepare this part of the mimer at all, so I'm totally on uncharted waters. Let's see if we can make heads and tails of this conclusion of the discourse. So last week we understood that there is the purpose of a stick, of a staff, is to when the rock is hard, it doesn't want to give water. That represents the soul being very, very entrenched in the body. The material and the whole mindset of time and space, of worldly existence, is holding a very, very tight grip on the soul. So the soul is very, very blocked, if we might say. Then to draw forth its yearning for God, its higher transcendental infinite desire for godliness is very hard. To bring forth its spirituality. So you need to hit it. You need to strike it. And that's when the soul is called a tzur. Remember, we learned in the earlier class. And that's why the beginning of the 40 years, the metaphoric experience of that was that in the beginning of the 40 years, the rock that Hashem tells Moshe to go and hit, because in the beginning of the 40 years, God tells Moshe to strike the rock. So that striking of the rock, it's called tzur. Tzur means hard, and that represented the Jews were still very, very, very much influenced by the Egyptian culture. I mean, their souls were still blocked. So you need to strike it. So the striking, he explained last week, if you remember, we discussed that striking the rock means something, but it's what the Zohar says, that when you can't get your log on fire, when you have wood, that you're trying to get onto fire, and it doesn't go on fire, you have to splinter it. So too, a body that you can't light the soul, that doesn't get ignited by the soul, then you need to splinter it. Mevachinle, you got to splinter it. So the splintering doesn't mean hitting it with physical force. It means speaking harsh words to yourself, which sometimes means breaking your ego, calling yourself out for what you. Calling oneself out for what really is, finding all the negative, dark things in a person, and really saying, "This is this, and you're not okay. You're not okay." That creates a broken heart, and when you get a broken heart, then the which is a broken ego, not really a broken heart, it's a broken ego. So when the ego breaks, then the soul is able to come. Excuse me. Then the soul is able to emerge and to express itself. That's what we learned is the tzur element. After the Jewish people matured and went through already an advanced and an elevation, because they traveled in the desert, and in our own, like the Midrash says, when a child is not a little child, when the teacher doesn't have to use a stick, if for whatever time you need to discipline the child, you can do it with words. So this is where the Jewish people were at the end of the 40 years, we learned. And this is the state where sometimes when a person has mastered the body, the soul has gained control over the body, and therefore the soul is just literally it needs a little blow. You have to blow in it a little bit, the flames of the soul. By the way, I saw something really interesting. Since I mentioned earlier that the teaching that when wood doesn't go on fire, you need to break the wood, you need to splinter it into smaller pieces. If you remember last week, we taught. I mentioned that this was a teaching of Gan Eden, the head of the yeshiva of Gan Eden in the Garden of Eden up in heaven gave that teaching. But what I didn't know, and I found it this week in Likutei Diburim from the previous Rebbe, is that when Reb Shimon Bar Yochai heard that teaching, it was a teaching that was revealed to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai became so excited when he heard that teaching, as if he struck the lottery. He said, all my life I've been chasing after this teaching. And now I finally got it. He prostrated to the ground. He kissed the floor. He was like beyond himself with joy. For that secret, that the log that doesn't catch fire, you have to splinter it. So too, a human being who cannot ignite their soul needs to be splintered, their ego, and that's how you can bring forth the light of the soul. The previous Rebbe, 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, has a long explanation on why Reb Shimon Bar Yochai got so excited. And what's so deep about that teaching that was got him beyond himself with joy. I'm not going to go into the explanation that the Friedrich Rebbe explains. I didn't finish reading it. I'm reading it day by day. But I'm just telling you that this teaching is not just a simple teaching. But again, that's implying the force. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did with the rock, and he hit the rock. And again, in the beginning, see, I talk about hitting the rock. In the beginning of the 40 years, we learned, thank you, that this was actually the right thing to do, because we were in a lowly spiritual level. And then after the 40 years were over, we've already reached maturity. And then all you would need is just to speak. What does it mean in the soul? The Gemara, the Midrash says, he brought a Midrash that you gotta read a passage of Torah. You read a passage of Torah. Moshe should have read a chapter of Torah. He should have recited, not read, he should have recited one chapter of Mishnah on the rock, and it would have given the water. That's when the rock is a selah. So we explained earlier in the discourse that even when the soul is in a state of maturity, it still needs to constantly be pushed. Because being comfortable creates static. And even if you're in a very good, healthy state spiritually, the evil inclination has no power over you. You're in a very healthy spiritual state. Even when a person is like that, you still need to apply pressure. And that's the idea, but the pressure should be pressure of Torah. Torah, the energy of Torah can come upon the soul and squeeze out the love and constantly push to a higher level. That's the point. That's what we're learning. Let's go now inside to the last. Oh, do you have the copies? Okay. Oh, you put it away last week. Good, thank you. Now we'll understand the sin of Moshe. This that he hit the rock. By hitting the rock, he struck the rod. He diminished the souls of Israel from their level. They were initially in the level of a rock. And he, by treating them as if they were still hard and difficult to control there and bring, in other words, difficult to live a higher life. They're still resistant. They're still entrenched in the material. By him seeing them that way, he lowered them. And that's very important, because of the way your leader sees you, the way a teacher, it's so important with parents and children. The way parents view their children, or the way a teacher views their students, or the way a rabbi views their congregants, or always the way someone who has supposed to be the the elevated person in their community and their people, the way they view their people, their constituents, that's the image the people will take for themselves. And as a result of that, they will perform in accordance to what is expected from them. And since Moshe showed them that he doesn't expect of them to produce their water, their love to God, only if he hits them, only if he beats them, then they start believing in themselves that that's the case. And since they were on a much more advanced level, that all he would need to do is just a little awakening, and he can already move them to such to that itself was a big sin, because he lowered them. Canal between the tzur and the sela. The Inyan, and I did. Now it's going to explain what happened, to which level did they reach to at the end of the 40 years. So he's going to. This is where we were holding last week. The Inyan, the Inebesayfa Mem Shana, because at the end of the 40 years, Shaholchu Bamidbar, that they traveled in the desert. Nemar, there's a verse that speaks about the condition of the Jewish people at that time. What was their condition? It says, God has not given you, Moshe says to the people, God has not given to you a heart to know, veinayim lirois, and eyes to see, adayom hazeh, until this day. I think he also adds over there, v'oznayim lishmo, and ears to hear. Here he doesn't bring that part of the verse, until today. And till now, you didn't have a heart, you didn't have eyes, you didn't have ears. But now you do have eyes, you do have ears, and you do have. In other words, you've developed a lot in the 40 years. Now, since the Jewish people were in that level that they have a heart to know, so they reached, that means that they really graduated the level of tzur, which is the hard rock, and they moved to the level of sela. So now he's going to explain, why is that? What did they gain? What was it that in the 40 years, what was the level that they achieved during that time? So if you remember earlier in the discourse last week, he brought a Kabbalistic explanation of what tzur is and what sela is. And he gave two interpretations. Tzur, according to one interpretation, tzur is the level of malchut, the level of kingship, when it is descending in the three lower worlds. Now, that's the level of divinity. Parallel that to the soul, it would mean the souls as they are already covered by the body, a soul that is embedded in the body, a soul that can get concealed and obscured by ego and by selfish and the self-interests of the body. That corresponds to the level of Shekhinah, the level of Malchus, that's enclosed in the three lower worlds. So in our individual lives, it would mean a person who's not in touch with this transcendental element of his soul, but he or she are only feeling the lower part of the soul. Now, the lower part of the soul is very enmeshed in ego. It's very obscured by natural life, by creation. Now, that's in our own private selves. In the cosmic soul, everything in the individual is a mirrors and reflects the spirit, the collective. The collective state of that is the Shekhinah, where God himself, the lower level of the Shekhinah, comes down to become a source for the three lower worlds. Since God himself becomes a source for the three lower worlds, he himself becomes vulnerable to their concealments, to their blockages. That's the level of tzur. What's the level of sela? Sela is also malchut, but malchus, the level of kingship, but malchus when it's still in atzilut, when it's still in the higher world, before it drops down into the lower world. What does that parallel in the soul? The part of our soul that's still above the body, and therefore not blinded by time and space, by the darkness of the body, and therefore can see and can feel things that are above time and space, and therefore has a very sharp awareness of God's infinity and how everything in front of Hashem is meaningless, and as a result of that, have only one passion and one drive towards to cleave to God. So when we are a tzur, which means the level of our soul that is enclosed in body, therefore obscured by body, then you have to peel away the outside peel. And to do that, you have to crack the shell. And cracking the shell requires a nutcracker. In this case, it requires the pressure of the stick. That's the tzur. But when you move into a level of Selah, okay, now he's going to show, that was one interpretation. Another interpretation he brought from the Kabbalistic writings. You remember all of this. Whoever was here last week, you'll remember this. The lower level, the one that needs a stick, is Malchus. I'm sorry, not even Malchus. It's Tiferes. Tiferes, the level of Tiferes, according to the second interpretation, think about this. According to the second interpretation, the tzur, the second interpretation is much higher than the first interpretation. The first interpretation is these are both levels of Malchus. According to the second interpretation, these are levels much higher than Malchus. These are levels of Tiferes, which Tiferes is the godliness that's above the world. Tiferes, the 6 emotions of God, that's not the source of creation. 6 emotions of God are above creation because creation only happens through divine speech. These are divine emotions, a much more inner level. Yet that's the lower level, that's called Tzur. And Selah is in Bina, which Bina is the mother of the emotions. So how do we make sense of that? How do we then say that Tzur represents a stage where you still need to beat it? And Selah is a stage where you don't have to beat it. Okay, Selah is not a question, of course. If even Malchus is already in a, if even Malchus in its higher level, when she's in Atzilus, Malchus when she's still in the upper world, is in a level that you can talk to her and you don't have to beat her. So Bina for sure is in a level that you can speak to it and you don't have to shake it with a stick. The question is, however, on the Tzur level, you say Tiferes. Tiferes, we're saying now, is the level of Tzur, the lower level. Now, Tiferes is higher than both levels of Malchut. So if we say that the higher level of Malchus is already, you can speak to, how is it that to the level of Tiferes, you need a rock? You need a stick. The answer is everything is relative. Everything is relative. According to the first interpretation, the entire subject of higher and lower is in a lower range, is in a lower world. In both cases, it's the same idea. The lower world, the lower state is more influenced by creation. The higher state is above creation, above the darkness. It's like when you're going on a plane, there's the below the clouds. It could be a rainy day, a dark day, and then you break through the clouds, and every day is a sunny day. So above, there's always a level above where there is no darkness. And that level, even if you can fall asleep, but all you need is a light awakening. You need a little tap on the shoulder. You don't need a sledgehammer. And then there are levels where you need to crack through something. You need to really break somebody. And that's the lower level. So in every case, that's the question is only, what level are we considering already obscured and which level is considered non-obscured? So from in the first interpretation, we're assuming a much lower take on the whole system over here. But yet, and in that lower world, we can understand there's a difference between Malchut, when Malchus goes down in the world, it's really, really contained and blocked. And the Malchus that's in Atzilus, when she's still connected to her husband, when she's still in the upper world, there she's not blocked. Now we take the same concept, but apply it to a higher level and say like this, that Tiferes, even though Tiferes is still pre-creation, and it's higher even than Malchut, that's above, that's an Atzilus. But since Tiferes is already part of the emotions, and creation is created not directly from the emotions, but it's based on God's emotions. Why? Because even though God only invested his speech when he created the world, but the speech is inspired by his emotions. That's why we discussed last week. There are 6 days to creation, right? And the 6 days are the 6 emotions. So you see that the emotional level of God is interactive with creation. And therefore, it picks up some of the darkness. And therefore, the level of Tiferes is still obscurable. It's still possible for there to be blockage. And think about it. The very fact that God is emotional to the creation, that means the creation gets to him, means that he's pretty close to it. If he would be completely, utterly transcendent, then how would the creations get to him to provoke his emotions? So the level of emotion, in general, emotion means a strata within a person where other people can push your buttons. That's what emotions are. Emotions are vulnerable to the outside. Intellect, however, as we discussed last week, that's the place where you are to yourself. Others can't mess with your intelligence, because intelligence is a place where you are for yourself. Intelligence is a deeper strata in the soul, a place of self-containment, a place where you're not interacting with the outside. Most people who are intellectual like to sit in solitude, be alone. So intelligence is real transcendence. So based on that, we were explaining, that's why we explained that the level of Tiferes, which is one of the emotions, it's the center of the emotions. There's 6 emotions, but Tiferes is the center. Therefore, Tiferes is already called is darkable. It's dimmable. It's obscurable. And that's why when the soul is on the level of Tiferes, if we can connect, then we are still possible for us to buy into the darkness of this world. And as a result of that, become seduced by its cover-ups and lose sight of Hashem being the only reality. But Bina, when the soul is on a level of Bina, over there, if we uncover our soul's root in Bina, in the divine intelligence, we're above and beyond all darkness. And from that place, the soul is, if anything, it can doze off, as we spoke earlier. It needs to be spoken to. It needs a little bit of an awakening, but it doesn't need a stick. So he's now, for the sake of explaining why the Jewish people after 40 years were in a state that they didn't need the stick anymore. He's employing the second interpretation, the one that Tiferes needs a rock and Bina doesn't need a rock. And he's going to prove that we were in a state of Bina. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need to use the rock. Why? Because it says God did not give you a heart to know. What kind of knowledge are we talking about? We're talking about the knowledge of Bina, the higher knowledge. The knowledge that there is none but him. And Moshe says, until this day you didn't have this knowledge, but now you do have this knowledge. So if the Jewish people had that level of knowledge, which means they accessed already the levels of Bina, they opened up their souls to the higher consciousness of Bina, they wouldn't need anymore to employ the force. And that's what he's saying over here. The Amud Azal again, and the Amud Azal and the sages say, Mikan. So on that teaching, where it says that God did not give you a heart to know and ears and eyes to see and ears to hear until this day, the sages say, from here we know that a person does not comprehend adaite de rabbi, the mind of his teacher, ad mem shanim, until 40 years. The sages derive that it takes 40 years for a person to reach the mind of their teacher. In our case, the mind of God. We understand. The mind of God, that's Bina. So till now, they were not on that level. But after after 40 years, a person could perceive the mind of their teacher. And therefore will understand how by Matan Torah it was the beginning of the 40 years and they did not achieve yet this knowledge. So you're going to say by Matan Torah it says God spoke to them face to face. Panim bepanim dibur Hashem imachem, face to face. So what do we mean? That was the beginning of the 40 years. So we would think that at the beginning of the 40 years they've already achieved the higher knowledge because they spoke to God face to face. He revealed everything to them. So he explains, no. Face to face, which means God's face was revealed to you. Shepirish panim bepanim. Who is slapshis panim the erech anpim bepanim dezah, which the meaning of face to face means like this. Face to face means that these are, according to Kabbalah, it means that the higher face of God revealed itself in the lower face of God. What does that mean? There are two faces. One is called the large face, and one is called the small face in Kabbalah. What does that mean? The 6 emotions, in general, the sphirot of Atzilus, all the attributes of Atzilus, which are in an image of a human, are called Ze'er Anpin, the small face. Primarily the 6 emotions, because they're limited already. And then there is, the Kabbalists speak of a level called Erech Anpin. Erech Anpin means large face. That's the level of the sphirot, the attributes, while they are in Keter. And Keser is infinite. So face to face means that God downloaded the higher face into the lower face. That by the giving of the Torah, there was a revelation of the consciousness, the truth of the higher face, which is utterly beyond Atzilos, which is beyond all limitation and all boundaries. The ultimate truth of God was revealed in the lower face. Usually Ze'er Anpin has, as we discussed earlier, Teferes is already a source for creation. It's a very limited, it's God already in a very constricted state. Erech Anpin is God in his expansive state. By the giving of the Torah, the higher face, the face of Erech Anpin, was revealed in the lower face. If that's the case, and that was revealed to the Jewish people, comes out that the Jewish people had already expansive vision and expansive knowledge. They perceived reality from God's perspective. No. If that's the case already, if that's at the beginning of the 40 years, then why do we have to wait till the end of the 40 years to say they matured? They should have been matured at the beginning of the 40s. You see, when Moshe was told to hit the rock, that was at the same time of the giving of the Torah. Well, and then he was told to hit the rock. That's his question. His answer is, yes, the higher face was revealed in the lower face, but in a way that it was enclosed in it. Enclothement means that it was hiding in it. Yes, God conveyed his deepest truth, but he conveyed it like it's like when a person takes a very deep concept and they put it in a parable. And the student, the listener, the audience only understands the parable, and they have a very vague understanding on the idea that wanted to be. They understand the idea, but only through the parable. And therefore, in a very, only through the metaphor. And therefore, in a very narrow manner. So it's true, God transmitted everything by the giving of the Torah, but because it was given to us, enclosed in the lower knowledge, in the lower face, and the lower face is still hiding and concealing, we didn't get a clear picture. We didn't have a sharp image of the ultimate absoluteness of Hashem, and that there's none but him. So much so that we should experience a total transformation, that our emotions should become completely given over to God. Now, naturally, we discussed earlier, we all have intrinsically a desire, a nullification to God, a desire for absolute oneness with Hashem. But that's an intrinsic, deeper truth which needs to be beaten. And that needs to be, sometimes it needs a force in order to crack it open. So by the beginning of he's trying to explain, by the beginning of the 40 years, although they had already the revelation of Erech Anpin, which is the revelation of Keter, which means of infinite truth, it was still enclosed in the lower das. So that's why Hashem didn't say to them after the giving of the Torah, you now have das. They didn't really have the das. When did they get the das? Means the knowledge. When does Moshe Rabbeinu said you finally have the das? After 40 years, now they have the das. So therefore, after 40 years, he doesn't have to strike them anymore. After 40 years, he could have spoken to them. So that's kind of the idea. Again, slapshus is the enclosement of panim, the erech anpin, the face of the erech anpin. Bipanim, the ze'er anpin, in the face of the ze'er anpin. The large face was enclosed in the small face. Like Ramosha Zakusi writes, look in that mimer. That is the higher das that is illuminating in the lower das, but it is still the lower das. The higher das is, he doesn't say bislapshus. I thought he said it's malubish. No, the truth is he does say earlier, he does say islapshus. I'm sorry, that's why I was saying it. But that means that the higher das, now it's from the word oi, he says oi. So it could be it's two different, he's trying to answer the question in two ways. One way is that the higher das was enclosed, and since it's enclosed, every enclosement means, it's like a metaphor, encloses an idea. So when you're perceiving a concept through a metaphor, and you're a person who really needs the metaphor, you're kind of limited with the limitations of the metaphor. It's like, I used as an example many times, when you try to explain math to little 5-year-olds, and you want to do that 2 + 2 is 4, they don't understand the abstract concept of 2 + 2 is 4. But if you tell them 2 fire trucks with another 2 fire trucks is 4 fire trucks. But then you bring 2 apples and you put another 2, they have no clue. Even though they understood that 2 and 2 is 4, but they only understood it in fire trucks. They don't understand it as an idea that 2 + 2 is 4 without fire trucks. It's fire trucks. Then you can broaden their minds and they realize that it's not only fire trucks, it's also police cars. That's already a certain extraction. You've extracted the idea a little bit from the metaphor. So now they understand that it's fire trucks and police cars as well. But it still has to be vehicles. So you'll bring in 2 motorcycles. They'll say motorcycles, yeah, motorcycles. Planes, yes. But you're going to bring in 2 candies with it. What does that have with candies? It's vehicles. Then you have to expand the mind that they realize that till they reach a point where you don't need things. 2 + 2 is 4, even in the abstract, without anything. So now we're using this example from Littleton. We're in the same thing. We perceive everything through metaphors. And there's a certain point where the metaphor has so much power over us that we don't see the essence of the idea. We see the idea only in its thing. So that's the concept he's saying earlier. That even though there was a revelation of Das Elyon, of the higher Das, it was enclosed in the lower Das. So they didn't really experience the absolute sharpness and vividness of the higher Das. Now he adds, or it's possible that it wasn't an enclosement, but rather the higher Das was shining in the lower Das. The way I understand that means to say that maybe this means a little more illumination. It's not enclosed, but it's still the lower Das illuminated by the higher Das. And what would be the metaphor for that? I don't know. The lower Das illuminated by the higher Das, that means that there is more experience of the higher das, the higher knowledge, but it's still within the framework of the lower das. And that was in the beginning of the 40 years. But after the 40 years, im came b'shna samem. However, when they reached the 40th year, Yshir, then they were able to, the Jewish people arrived, lemadregas das elyon, to the higher das, to the naked higher das, to the higher das that's not enclothed, that's not vested, either enclosed or not even shining in the lower das. Their ability to perceive the higher das in its purity. When you're, and he's going to explain, that's the perception of Bina. Bina gets to experience the higher, what's the higher das? So we learned this many times. There's the lower das and the higher das. The higher das, the lower das is the perspective of creations. What's the, not just physical creations, even spiritual creations. The perspective of the creations is that the world is something. Creation is of some value, is of something. And God is the power that is, of course, he's the superpower that creates the creation. But the creation is also something. That's the lower das. The higher das is that with the way God sees it. He is, and he's the only reality, and the creations are absolutely nothing. They have no existence at all other than he's making it every second. If he stops thinking them for a second, they disappear. What kind of flimsy existence is it? It's really nothing. And if anything, he's the existence of them. They have no existence. So God sees it that we are literally nothing. That's the higher das. As long as we're living in the lower das, our love to God could be blocked. Why? Because there's a competition. There is God, and there is the material. There are stuff in the world that are my pursuits, because the world is something. There's something to compete. But when you're living in the higher das, then you're in a state of he is, and there's none but him. So where is your love going to go to if not to him? There's nothing else to love. He's the only reality. So therefore, we're saying that the Jewish people, after the 40 years, reached the level of the higher das. Hainu lahasig, which means to apprehend and comprehend, eich dekamei, how before him, kulei kalochashiv. All is not, like we're learning this in the Mashiach class that I'm teaching every day, the short Mashiach class. We're learning this idea to come to the state of serving God from a perspective of kula kamei kalochashiv. All besides God, nothing exists. There's no more conflict anymore. Automatically, the only reality is God's reality. And this is the level of Selah. Why? Because we said earlier from the Kabbalists, what did we learn? That Selah is in Bina. Shehu bebina. That Selah is in the level of Bina. Remember we said Sur is in Tiferes and Selah is in Bina. According to the second interpretation, because the first interpretation was from the Pardes, from Ramak. The second interpretation is from the Ma'orei Or. And Shabina, now, like we learned earlier. Now, and what do we know about Bina? Now he wants to prove now that Bina, that in Bina there is the consciousness and the perspective that he is and there's none but him. Why? Because it says that Bina and Chachma are two friends that never separate. Which means the truths of Chachma are continuously perceived by Bina. Bina perceives the truth of Chachma. And what's Chachma? Chachma is koach ma, the power of what? Chachma is in a constant state of utter nothingness. Chachma is the ultimate experience that you are, that when the Chachma experience is an experience of, to experience ein od milvado, there's none but him. And therefore, I am what? I have no existence. Chachma transmits that to Bina. And Bina is not moody. Bina is not fluctuating. Bina is always connected to Chachma. That means Bina is always receiving this truth from Chachma. Comes out in Bina is the understanding and the experience how ein od milvado, there's none but him. So when the Jewish people reached the level of Bina, which happened at the end of 40 years, by the way, the sages say, Ben Arbaim Labina. Now, when you're 40 years old, it doesn't bring it over here. And at 40 years old, you reach Bina in age. So when the Jewish people were born, actually, when they went out, we can add that in. He doesn't say it, but if I can say a little something of my own, which is that when they went out of Egypt, they were born. It's called the birth. So now they were 40 years old. 40 years old, they reached Bina. So once the Jewish people were 40 years old and they reached the level of Bina, they had that understanding of Ein Od Milvado, none but him. They had a higher das. If that's the case, for sure their love to God is not obscured anymore. There's no competition. There's nothing to block. There's nothing to hide. In other words, our animalistic self dissolves completely when you're in a level of Bina. There's no room left anymore for the animal consciousness. So, because Bina and Chachma married to each other, they never separate. We know that the infinite one dwells in Chachma. Chachma is the window where the Or Ein Sof dwells. And when you're looking at the Or Ein Sof, when you see literally the Or Ein Sof, there's none but him, then that's a state of the higher das, the higher knowledge. Which is the level of the echad, the real echad, the real perception that God is and there's none but him. Like it says in Tanya, chapter 35, that Chachma is the only place where you have the crystal sharpness of God is and there's none but him. The ultimate truth. That's why Chachma is in complete self-abnegation. Now, Chachma transmits that truth to Bina. Of course, Bina doesn't have it with the same sharpness like Chachma. But Bina is still a recipient. She's still the wife of Chachma. She receives Chachma's truth. So if the Jewish people were on the level of Bina, means they were on the level that they received the truths of Chachma, which is Ein Od Milvado, there's none but him. That's it. That's where the higher das, is then present and prominent in Chachma. Shehua emes, which is the truth. How before him all is not. Since he says that in Chachma is shining Echad Emes, the true oneness, and now he brings from Rambam that what is the truth? What's the oneness of God? When we say Hashem Elokim Emes, that Hashem is true, she'ein lacham mitzius amiti zulasai. There's no real existence other than God. So then reality becomes only one thing, God. So if you really deeply perceive that God is the only reality, how can you love something else? How can you be passionate and desire something else when you know it's fake? It has no real existence. It's like a person getting excited about a business opportunity, getting very excited, this and that, doing all kinds of, even investing money and whatever, and then you find out one day it's a fraud. The whole thing was a fraud. There's no such an entity. The whole thing doesn't exist. It's a fabrication. It's a whole thing is a mess. Okay, you feel sorrow. You feel terrible that you fell for it. Now, what happens if a week later you get a letter and it comes from with the same story? You can invest in this place. They're finding diamonds somewhere, and a whole story. Maybe you'll fall for it a second time. After 2 times and finding out that the whole thing was a hoax, it'll bounce right off you. You won't be able to pursue it. You won't be excited about it. How can it even draw you if you know that's a fake? It's a hoax. So when we come to a shared, clear vision that everything that's not, of course the world is real. The world is real because God's interest in it. But everything that's outside of God's interest in it doesn't exist even. It's just a mirage. Anything that's not Hashem's interest, how can you love these things? Nothing. So the problem is we fall for it the whole time because we don't see with clarity. But if you have an experience of Bina and you reach that state, automatically there's nothing to draw your heart anymore in the world. The Yisrael is sigu b'chinazeh, and the Jewish people arrived at this level. Now, when Moshe went and Moshe went and hit them, which means he hit the rock. Hoira, he indicated Shenishmas Yisrael Madayim b'madrei Yasur. By that statement, he declared the Jewish people were still on a level that they need to be hit, that they're in the level of Tzur. He denied them this maturity. And guess what? When Moshe sees in them that level, they start seeing themselves also in that place. Shehu b'chinas, which is, now, it's not like, remember we learned that these three levels, or these two levels correspond to being a daughter and a wife. Remember? So this is what he's saying. Shehu b'chinas chesed nurayach. It's the love of youth when you're still immature. Shalahem, that's why their sin. Who does he mean there? He means Moshe and Aaron. Gadol Meneso, it was very serious. And that's why God says, I'm sorry. God was not going to let them into the land of Israel. Because they underestimated the Jewish people. Okay. Achlafiza, however, if this is the case, La Matziva like Kachasamata. Why did he command them to take the stick? Here's where Hashem is tricking them. Remember we learned about this 2 weeks ago? He seems like he's setting them up because he's telling them, take the stick, take the staff, and speak to the rock. Come on, if they have to only speak to the rock, why does he tell them, take the stick? The stick has no the stick has no other function other than beating. If you're not going to beat them, why do you have to take the stick? So, and if Moshe needed the stick for a walking stick, then he would take it anyways. God doesn't have to command him. He's telling him to take the stick for the action. So then why does he need the stick? So the answer is going to be interesting. I wasn't understanding it till this minute, so I'm beginning to see maybe what he's saying, is that the stick was going to be used just as a statement of authority. Even if you don't have to hit the rock, you still need to, as we learned earlier, speak to it, and the speaking needs to be authoritative kind of speaking. And by holding the stick, that's a sovereign ruler holds a stick. If Moshe would stand in front of the Jewish people, again, the rock is just a physical metaphor for the people. So if Moshe is standing and talking to the rock without a stick, then he's conversing with the rock, but without authority. When he's standing and holding the stick, then he's conversing with the rock and speaking to the rock as an authoritative figure. Then his words would have power. The words would have power, but it has to be with a state of memshala, of dominion. You don't have to like you don't have to speak harsh words, but it's like, sometimes as a parent, you always have to be, when it comes to your children, you always have to be an authority. You can't be friend to friend. Even if your child is at a point where they're seeking your guidance and you're guiding them without having to be harsh and disciplining with them. But you still have to be a parent. Then your words have authority. Or else they don't need you as a parent. Then they can go talk to a friend. So your influence you have on your children is when you're coming from a place of authority, but you can be authoritative with a stick, or you can be authoritative on your children. You can be authoritative on your children without the stick, but there has to be an authority. That's what I get he's saying over here. So he explains like this. So let's understand. Moshe's staff was on the same level in Mata de Yaakov, like the staff of Yaakov. By Yaakov it says, Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden. With my staff I crossed the Jordan. And then we also find that when Yaakov was going to inherit all the wealth of Lavan, he was using a stick. He took a stick and he put it in by the water and he peeled the stick. It says Yaakov took a makel livne. He took a stick from a hazelnut tree and he peeled it and he made stripes and he put it in front of the sheep. So we see that Yaakov worked a lot with a makel, with a stick. So he says Moshe's stick and Yaakov's stick are related to each other. What does Moshe's stick have to do with Yaakov's stick? So it says in general that Moshe and Yaakov are both the same level. According to Kabbalah, Moshe and Yaakov are the same level. Yaakov is the external level and Moshe is the pnimius. Yaakov milavar, Yaakov is on the outside, and Moshe milagav, Moshe is from the inside. Moshe and Yaakov are the same spiritual level, but Yaakov is external and Moshe is the soul of it, the pnimius of it. And if I remember that we once learned the Maimer from the Rebbe Marash, where he explained, he brings a medrash, that Moshe's stick that he used when God told him to take the stick, it really was Yaakov's stick that somehow made it its way to Yisro, and Yisro stuck it into his garden. It was stuck in Yisro's garden and he couldn't remove it. And Moshe was able to pull that stick out. And the stick, it's the whole story, how it was Yaakov's stick somehow through Yosef ended up by Yisro. I'm not exactly sure how it made its way into Yisro's garden. But it was the staff of Yaakov. So it really is the same stick. So the stick of Moshe is the same stick, the same level of the stick of Yaakov. Sheksiv, and by Yaakov's stick it says, by Yaakov's staff it says, Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden. For behold, with my staff I crossed the Jordan. Now this is for you, Yossi. Ki b'makli, the word b'makli, with my stick, Rosh Tevis. The word b'makli, the acronym of the word b'makli, Beis Mem Kuf Lamid Yud. He says, stands for the words. Beis stands for Baruch. I'm sorry, not just b'makli. Ki b'makli. Ki b'makli. For with my staff. That's what Yaakov says. Ki b'makli. So you take those Chaf Yud, Beis, Mem, Kuf, Lamed Yud, 7 letters, spells like this. The Beis of b'makli is Baruch. The Chaf from the word Ki spells the word Kevoid. The Yud is the first letter of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Baruch Kevoid Hashem. And the Mem, Bema, Mem from Makli, Mimkomo. Baruch Kevoid Hashem Mimkomo. It's what we say during Kedusha. We say, Baruch Kevod Hashem Mimkomo. Blessed is the glory of God from his place. So we're left with another 3 letters. Lamed, Kuf, Yud, because there's another Yud in Ki b'makli, and a Lamed, and a Kuf. That stands for the word Lishiyascha, for your salvation. Kivisi Hashem, I hope to God. So again, he's saying, Ki b'makli is a combination of 2 verses. One is blessed is the glory of God from his place, and the other one is, for your salvation, Kivisi Hashem, I'm waiting for God. So somehow this staff had within it the ability to do what? To draw down the glory of God from his place. And l'shiyascha kivis Hashem. I hope for your. First of all, what's the hope? How does this all come together? Let's see. And it's the head l'shiyascha for your salvation kivis Hashem, which is one of the psukim Yaakov says to his son Dan. When Yaakov blesses Dan, he says l'shiyascha kivis Hashem, for your salvation I wait, God. So again, he doesn't give much commentary on what that means. He just brings that. Now, so let's see, what is the staff of Yaakov? By the staff of Yaakov, it says, Vayikach lo Yaakov makel levana. Yaakov took a white stick. Lach, that was moist. Viluz, luz I think means a hazel something. And he peeled it. And what happened was, when you peel the redness, I think outside it's red. When you peel it, it's underneath is white. So he left stripes, red and white. Levana b'chinas chesed, luz hu gevura, shemareyu edoim. The luz is red, and therefore it symbolizes gevura. The hamakal and the stick, since you had one stick that has both white and red, so what is that? It's teferes. Teferes can combine chesed and gevura. And therefore it was Yaakov's stick. That's why Avram doesn't have such a stick. Yitzchak doesn't have such a stick. Because Avram and Yitzchak are chesed or gevura. Yaakov is balance. So he has both of them. V'hainu teferes. P'tzolois levanois noite klapa chesed, and there was leaning towards kindness. U'kamoi kenoi amate Moshe. And the same was Moshe, since Moshe and Yaakov are on the same line. So Moshe's staff was also with that. V'hainu ki amate roimes lebchenes memshala. So the mata, the staff, indicates dominion. Ulamayla hine metat. Hu b'chenes mata deza. It says that the malach metatron, that's the stick of the ze'eran. Elechein hum shekechas amata hu b'chenes hamemshala. Avaloisha Yaakov amata ki amata shamakam bo yamata achem. He throws in all this Kabbalah over here, and in the end he ignores all of it, and he just explains it simply. Stick is dominion. And Hashem told him to take the stick because he needed to dominate over. But it's not meant to hit, because the staff of hitting, of striking, is a different stick. There is such a stick that is meant for striking. But that's a different stick, not this stick. This stick is just as a exhibition of might and strength of dominion. Why did he bring me a whole story over here of the thing over here of the so I'm gonna, in order for me to explain this, I'm gonna have to run over there and take out the books I had last week, because as I said, I didn't prepare today's class, but I have still. Last week I looked this up, and what did we find out? Over there in the Rebbe, there might be some explanation. So give me a minute, because I don't want to leave this. This is too of a good piece to leave it hanging. Noon days, I think it was. Let's see if he adds a little commentary. And Lamed. Oh, between the two of them, I should find something. Oh, Samach. Yeah, Ki b'makli Rosh Tevis, okay. In b'makli Yaakov Levana v'chenes Chesed lo good, huh? Ptzolis Levana lo b'chesed. Kamoi ken amate Moshe. I know ki amate Rem Chen Moshe lo amate. So he over here he adds a little. I'm going to read what he says over here to add a little, but he doesn't explain this whole concept of Baruch Kvoid Hashem Mkomo. But let's see what he says. This is the Rebbe Rashab. He adds just now what is not stated in the Mimer. In other words, the concept that we said that there's two types of sticks. There's a stick that's meant to beat, and there's a stick that's meant to just show dominion. So he says, according to the level that there are in the Jewish souls, since the Jewish souls can sometimes fluctuate from a lower level to a higher level, so the leader who has a stick has different levels in his stick, depending on matching the level of the Jewish people wherever they are. So there are levels in Moshe's staff. Moshe is the shepherd and the leader of the Jewish souls. So there is a stick, to beat with it. And that is when the Jewish people were in a state of immaturity. That's the idea that when you have to break through the animal soul. Sometimes you need to crash the animal soul with harsh words. Remember, we learned about the log that cannot go on fire, that you have to really splinter it. That's why in Parshas Beshalach, you should take the staff with your hand in your hands. The Yedua, it is known, the first time, at the beginning of the 40 years, the Inyan ha-eser makos, the 10 makos that Moshe did with the stick, the Mitzrayim oilachnia esa klipa, to subdue the klipa, uleshoibra, and to break it. The klolus Inyan golus Mitzrayim, because the general exile in Egypt, was in order to purify the sparks, to select the sparks. Shenaflu benahar nilas. Initially, why were there so many sparks in Mitzrayim? Because there are 4 rivers that go out of Eden, and when the sparks fell, they went down the river. So most of the sparks, the biggest deposit of sparks, went down the Nile River. God comes to take a nation from within a nation, which means to elevate the sparks that are buried within the nation. The holy spark, that they were mavara there. In order to take out the spark, you have to crack it open, the klipa that's on it. And that's why there were 10 makas, the 10 plagues, lishbar klipa se'egus, to break you see, I'm Shaya. He actually mentions the nutcracker, because I saw you like that. He says to break the klipa, the shell of the nut, ulakachas aperi, and to take the fruit, misham hemenitzutzis, which are the sparks. So that's and so just like it was in Mitzrayim, we understand that the matter was to break a husk that's blocking, in order to crack it open and to take out the pneumias. So too within the Jewish people themselves, we also have a little klipa still on us from Mitzrayim. In order to open up the Jewish people, to bring out their pneumias. Over there, he told him, take the stick, to beat in the rock. But over here by the Sela, where he told him to take the stick, here it means just dominion. All they needed was words. With just speaking, but speaking with authority, because he's holding a stick, he would have already elevated them. With the word of a king, shiltain. It has to be the word of a king who rules. But how does he rule? With his words. All you needed was words. You didn't need to beat them. He would have spoken authoritatively words of Torah. He would have awakened the fire that's in them, their love to God, and it would have been there. Let me conclude of Vizehu, Oz Yshir Yisrael, and this is the meaning. Then the Jewish people sang, Ali Be'er, rise Be'er, Anula, speak to it. That was the song that we had 2 weeks ago. Parshas Chukas, 3 weeks ago. Ali Be'er, rise Be'er. The Yeshua Imari explains, what does that mean? Shahanesham, the soul, Kamoisha, Melubashas Beguf, when the soul is enclosed in body, unlike the soul when the soul is still in heaven, Nikra Be'er. In heaven, the soul is called the Mayon, a spring. But over here, it's called the Be'er. All the work of the Neshama's avoda, of the soul's work down here below, is from the bottom up. You start off being very, as a little baby, only knowing your body. Slowly you start, as you get a little older, and you get to start, and you have educators who try to bring forth in you a little bit more of a higher spiritual self. And then you go higher, and then you start rectifying the body. And then you take the physical things in this world, and you're supposed to elevate them to find godly content in them. And so you elevate and elevate and elevate. That's all from the bottom up. That's called a be'er. A be'er is like a well. You dig a well. Hainu bidir aguf. That's the purification of the body canal. Achsev. However, we know that even though we're a well, what does it say by Yaakov when he came to the well? When Yaakov came out into the field and he came to the well, what was sitting on the well? The Even Gedola, there's a big rock sitting on the well. And the sages say that that's the Yetzer Hara, that's the evil inclination. V'chumriyas aguf, and there's the coarseness of the body, hamastirim, that block the soul. Ulezoy tzarich liyas mevachin le'el aguf. So sometimes you need to beat the body. B'chdei sheyizgala habe'er, so that the well should be revealed. Hu aneshama, k'niskalel, as we said earlier. Amnam kan amar, but over here he says, so that's usually the be'er. The air takes a lot of work. However, over here the Jewish people are singing. Why are they singing? They appreciated that in the end of 40 years, the be'er is already ready to give its water without the rock. And that's why they said, Ali be'er, let the waters of the be'er go up. Kishanashama hu b'b'chinas aliyah, when the soul is already in an elevated state. Shekvar is gabra ala guf. We've already worked it out. The soul already overcame the body. The soul is already a master on the body. The nefesh bahamis and the animal soul. And the soul is having already a much deeper love, not because it's no more fighting with the opposite. It's already free to express itself. Even though you can never let yourself cruise. You always have to push yourself more than you want. That's a rule always. Even when you're inspired, that's what it says in Tanya. We learn that even when you're inspired, you can never just do mitzvahs with the amount of inspiration that you have. You always need to make yourself uncomfortable. Always have to push yourself more than you want. V'zeh kafiya canal. V'zeh gam kein pirish ali be'er. That you need to elevate the be'er. You always have to push it higher. That the be'er should go higher. You're already a be'er. You're already a well. But you want it to go higher. Amnam, you don't have to use a stick. Amnam zal yedei ha-Torah, that's through Torah. Shana perek, all of perek echad. You have to inspire it with words of Torah. Like this, you'll drive the be'er up. And that's what the Jewish people said, Enula. Enula means speak to her. You don't have to hit her. Enula. Shout out to the be'er, and it will go up. V'zau shali be'er zau ayadei anula b'dvarim. Just speak to it in words. This is how he concludes the Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab. The Tzemach Tzedek over here has quite a bit still, so we didn't finish. I'm just trying to figure out why did he bring this whole story with the makal of Aaron, with the staff of Moshe, how it was the same like Yaakov, and how it is Tiferes, and it's a mix of, what does it have to do with the whole subject over here? How does that makal having to do with being Tiferes, a combination of Chesed and Gevura, have anything to do why Hashem told him to take the stick? And what's the connection to this that he said that Makli is Baruch Kavod Hashem Imkomo L'Shiascha Kavisi Hashem? I don't know, and it bothers me. So I'm going to do a little check in this mimer. Here's another mimer where this is the Rebbe Rashab's mimer. Hold on, the Rebbe Marash, I mean, and maybe I'll find it over here. I know it was here. We learned it last week. Oh, Kuf Pei Zayin. Okay, he does add quite a lot over here, but still not explanation on the Kabbamakli. So why not? Why not? We anyways have a few, we have a little piece over here. So let's see how he says this. Interesting. He explains a little better over here why Moshe was punished. I saw that Ariella winced when she heard Moshe was punished. She gave her like a wink. So I'm trying to make it a little softer on her. I notice everything. She still, because while we said that Moshe was punished for that, she felt that the Eibishter was not fair. And she let me know with all her facial expressions that she completely does not agree that the God punished him for this. But okay, I noticed it, so that's why I'm going to try to fix that over here. And Moshe conducted him. How did I know? I know. I see. Moshe conducted himself kiminhag shetzrichem linogim tzur. Moshe conducted himself like the conduct that you have to conduct yourself with a tzur. Shu b'chenes bas, when she's still a girl. Remember we said girl versus wife. Adaloi kibis. When she's still a girl, when she's still a virgin, meaning she hasn't yet ever connected, she's still closed. That means that the heart is still closed like a virgin, which means that the heart is not yet opened. And that's why his sin was very great. And he explains like this. Because God said, I only gave you greatness. The leaders of the Jewish people are very great. Very great. But it's never about them. They're great because they're the leaders of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are so special in God's eyes, they need a great leader. So God gives them a great leader. So his greatness is always dependent on them. So if he pushed them down, by him diminishing them, automatically he was diminished. And it's not even a punishment. It's a direct derivative. As the moment he shrunk them, he shrunk too. It's not like a punishment. He shrunk. So if he shrunk, he couldn't take them into the land of Israel. He shrunk from a spiritual level. Why? I only gave greatness only for the sake of Israel. As the sages say, that when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, after the sin of the golden calf, he said, you go down. And the sages say that doesn't only mean go down the mountain. It meant that since the Jewish people fell and they sunk to a very low level, you're also going to go down now. That means all your spiritual levels that you just attained by sitting with me for 40 days and 40 nights learning the Torah, you're losing it all. And what does it say? According to Kabbalah, God took from Moshe 1,000 lights. And Moshe doesn't have it anymore. The 1,000 lights that Moshe had, 1,000 is a very high number. The 1,000 lights that he had was taken away from him. It says that it's given back to Moshe on Shabbos. Moshe doesn't have it, and that's the meaning of Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. That's why Moshe is very happy on Shabbos. Because Moshe is happy with the gift that's given to him, that God restores the lights that he had every Shabbos. It must be that we are also elevated on Shabbos, because if Moshe is contingent on the Jewish people, Ubeshabbos machzirim oisam loy. On Shabbos they give it back to Moshe. Elachein oimrim Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko on Shabbos. Im kein kan over here. When Moshe lowered the Jewish people from their level, from the level of Selah to the level of Tzur, that's why measure for measure, Hashem swore, you will not be able to bring them yet. And then he asks the question, we said earlier, so why did he tell him to take the stick? Right? That's that he should only take the dominion. Okay. And how do we know that? Because even Mashiach, when he will come, is going to hold the stick. Mate uzcha yishlach. It says, yishlach Hashem. The staff of strength God will send. And that's the staff of Mashiach. Now, in the days of Mashiach, we're going to be finished with all the birurim already. We're going to be finished with all the rectifications. All the klippas are going to be broken already. Hashem is going to already circumcise our heart. We're not going to have any more blockages. If that's the case, why would Mashiach need a stick? So obviously, if Mashiach is going to have a stick as well, it's not to hit anything. Mashiach is not going to strike anybody or anything. It's because of dominion, for the authority, for the kingship of Mashiach. So therefore, Moshe also, Hashem told him to take the staff. And he even adds in, he throws a little sizzle in, that Moshe is Mashiach. As we know, Moshe is the first redeemer, Moshe is the last redeemer. Not physically, but spiritually, the energy of Moshe is in Mashiach. It's like almost like a reincarnation of Moshe's neshama into Mashiach. Moshe is going to be the future redeemer. And that's why he said, take the stick. And he shouldn't hit. Because the stick that you hit, that's a different type of a stick. It's a stick of a rebuke. When do you have to use the stick? It says with children, you have to have a stick. King Solomon says that someone who holds back the staff is chosech shifto soneh beno. That's right. If you hold back the stick, you hate your children. That means children need discipline. Oh, but when they're a child, when the Jewish people were on the level of being a daughter to God, then even as a daughter, they need beno and bat is the same thing. It's either boy or girl, but they still need the stick. If you love your child, then you give him musar. So that's on the level of being a child. For the level of child to father, like we discussed earlier, this week's parsha, binureha beisavia, when she's still young and she's in her father's house. That's the level of tzur we said earlier. For this, the teacher has to hit. Dvarim kashim, harsh words. The yargus adam, again, even hitting doesn't mean hitting, but sometimes it means beating with words. Like Moshe, we learned last week, Moshe killed the Mitzri. It says vayach, he hit him, but he only pronounced words on him. So you see that words can a lot of times be a stick. The yargus adam to speak harshly and to break the chumrias, to bring forth the hidden love. Once we've matured and we reached already at the end of 40 years, we reached already a level of maturity. Higdil means when we become the level of go gadol, which dvukim b'pchinas gadol Hashem, we're already cleaving to the greatness of God. That's why my son Zalmi always screams, Eibishter is grois, Eibishter is grois. You know, gadol Hashem, he's already in Mashiach's level. To Hashem's essential. He's going to laugh if I share this to him. With his essential greatness. Ein cheker, there's not fathomable. This level, at the 40th year, they reached this level. Let's say Bnei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim. Shnas the Mei Meriva, that was the year of the quarrel stone. That doesn't need any more a stick. V'zahu inyan, you know where you have such a water that comes on its own, doesn't need to be hit? The Shiloach River that was next to the temple. We know that next to the temple in Jerusalem, there was a special river called the Shiloach. And the sages say about the Shiloach that it's a very calm river. It goes la'at, la'at. La'at means calmly. That means the waters flow without being. So what's the la'at? He says la'at is the numeric value of mem, of 40. Lamed aleph tes is 40. At the 40th year, they reached the level of meh hashiloach. So there, the rock that was with them was la'at oilaba omeh hashiloach omeh mayon de gichon. Now we know that the water of the shiloach is the water of the spring of the Gichon River. It really goes, because all the rivers come from the 4 rivers. So it comes from the Gichon. Shemoishchen Malchus Beis David, which that's the Mayon that in which they anoint the kings of David. The kings of David are anointed. It says, Ein Moishchen. I spoke about this other times. It says you do not anoint a king from the house of David only next to a spring, only by the Mayon. I told you many times that's the reason why at Mayon Yisrael we talk so much about this Indian of Melech HaMashiach and all this. From all the places in the world, everybody's afraid to talk. Only I talk openly, because over here is in the Mayon is where Yemoshech Malchus Beis David. That's my own Torah, but it's the emes. After Mashiach comes, you'll hear that. Not from me, from Mashiach. Shemoishchen Malchus Beis David. The Moishech, you anoint Malchus Beis David at the Maya. Now, what's the connection? Why is he bringing that over here? He's bringing that over here probably because that's already the level of Mashiach, where you don't need a stick, as we said. And Mashiach himself won't have a stick. He's going to have a stick, but you don't need a stick to hit. It's not a hitting stick. But he does not explain this whole line about Yaakov's stick. I don't know. Mata Moshe was the Mata of Aaron, and it's a Mata Livne, it's a Lach, and it's a mixture of Chesed and Gevura, and Baruch Kavoid Hashem Emkomo, L'Sheyascho Kavisi Hashem. I have no clue. There's 1 or 2 other discourses I can check, but I'm not going to go hunting for now. Let's finish the last piece. Now, in the future, by Mashiach, it says, Gam mate uscha yishlach, that Hashem is going to send this Mashiach with a stick. That he will also have a stick. Mashiach's stick is higher than the staff of Moshe. In other words, even when Hashem says to Moshe, take the stick, it's similar to Mashiach who's going to have a stick. Both the sticks of Moshe and Mashiach were not meant to strike, are not striking sticks. But yet Mashiach's staff is much higher than Moshe's staff. Because just like in avoda, in a person's soul, there's 3 levels, and this is the connection to Parshas Matos, our week. In the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Parshas Matos, it speaks about a woman in 3 stages. Either when she makes a vow, either she's a girl in her father's house, unmarried and non-betrothed. She's younger than 12 and a half, binurel, and she's a naira. Naira is from 12 to 12 and a half. She's a young girl. So we have to figure out, obviously, in addition to being a physical girl in a father's house, it's the condition of the Jewish people called a young girl when she's a naira in her father's house. The next level is when she becomes betrothed, she's engaged, she's married, but not fully consummated the marriage, called Erus in the first stage of marriage. And then finally, the Imbeis Isha Nedara, if she's already in her father's house when she makes. The second level is called the Imhaya Tia Leish, when she is set aside for a man, but she's still in her father's house, but she's designated to a man. And the third level is when she's already in her father's home. In her husband's home. So these are 3 stages. These are 3 stages in the advance of history of our connection to Hashem. So since there are 3 levels, obviously, in the days of Mashiach, we will be already. The sages say that the giving of the Torah was only Erusin. It was only the first stage of marriage. Only when Mashiach will come will be the Nisu'in, which means the full marriage. So therefore, the mata, you always need, I'm not saying, in other words, in every level, there needs to be accompanied by a stick. Why? Because you always have to apply pressure. Because only with this pressure do you perform the best. But the question is, what kind of stick? For each level, there's a stick. For the little girl in her father's house, the stick is to be used sometimes to put her in place. But the latter 2 stages doesn't need a stick to hit. What then? Let me explain. The lowest level, when she's still in the youth, which was the Jewish people until the 40th year, when they went out of Egypt, that first stage, then they needed a stick that hits. It's the idea that if you hold back the stick, you don't like your son. You despise it. If you love your child, King Solomon says, you discipline them. Habe is the second stage is the second stage is if she's to a man, is the level of Erusin. What's Erusin? Betrothal. That's Moshe's staff. Then you're using your staff for dominion. Then you can affect adibor. All you need to do is speak authoritatively, and that's good enough. The word of the king rules. If you're speaking like a king, then your words have effect. If you're speaking like a buddy, it won't help. There has to be a certain sense of authority. But to the highest level, which is already a girl who's already fully in her husband's, married to her husband, this is already Mashiach's staff. Which will be in the future. The staff of strength. And he doesn't say what the staff is used. He just says it's a higher level. But let's see. And that's why in the future it says, that he will raise his hand. Mashiach will raise his hand on the river. And he will splice the river into 7 pathways. In a complete different way. When we went out of Mitzrayim, the sea split to 12. Now it's going to split to 7. Because in the future the aliyah is going to be in the 7 lower aspects of Keser. So, okay, what he's referring to, I can tell you. What he wants over here, I don't know. What he's referring to is what it's explained in many places, the difference between, on all the Achar Shal Pesach discourses, the difference between the splitting of the sea when we went out of Mitzrayim and the splitting of the splitting of the river that's going to be in the days of the future, is that by the splitting of the sea, Moshe split it into 12. And Moshe used the stick. It says, Hare mesmatcha, God says to Moshe, lift your stick. By Mashiach, when he splits the river, it doesn't say, Hashem says, V'heinef yada, he'll raise his hand. And the other difference is that here it's split to 12 and there it will split to 7. And it's explained why. The concept of splitting the water body means to tear away the filters. God presents many filters, and those filters are called waters. They filter our consciousness. When we went out of Egypt, we broke, and we were going to receive the Torah, we broke open the filter, the screen, so that godliness can pass through. But it says that the filter that was broken then was the lower filter. The filter that separates between Bria, the world of creation, and the world of Atzilus. That was penetrated with 12. Why? Because there's 12 Shvatim or 12 Chayos. There are four animals of the Merkava. Each one have 3, so it's 12. Each one has. So it's together, it's 12, and that's the way Bria and Atzilus become unified together. But when we want to connect above Atzilus, break through Atzilus to Keser, we want to connect to the 7 channels of Pnimius HaKeser. So it's no more, the number is not 12, the number is 7. It's a long discussion, not for now, but that's the idea. So I guess over there, Mashiach will use his hand, not a stick. But it doesn't explain, so then why does he need the stick? Leaves us with a mystery. And he comes to, and he just crash lands over here. I mean, in the Mimer, it doesn't say anything. He just says, oh my God. Okay. The air, I guess he wants us to figure it out on our own. And finally, the last small little paragraph. Be'er, the well, chafaruhu sarim, because after it says, alu be'er enula, which we explained earlier means that after the end of the 40 years, the be'er can go up just by speaking to it. You don't need to apply more force. The Jewish people continue and they say, who dug the be'er? Be'er, the be'er, chafaruhu, that was dug, sarim, by ministers. B'mechaykek b'mashanaysam, through the lawgivers with their sticks. Referring to Moshe and Aaron who cracked open the rock. Be'er chafaruhu sarim ka ala avos is referring to the avos. The next is Migdash adna koin yedecha Migdash kal nishmas Yisrael much wasli Migdash chanti b'seichel. Teichel enem lo b'teichem techkolech Yisrael v'ayna shem nikra Migdash. The half should be Migdash lo oilam moise gam das shmam starts any more levels up b'chinas helem aval beis Migdash mei begilui v'tzarich li is b'chinas keli lezeh v'zeu al yedei ha'avois Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov yem gimel yadis yadak dul yadak rama zeh Migdash koin yedecha zeh b'chaver surim kam choykik zeh Moshe that yochayim li is b'chinas keli shoraseh. Okay, what is he saying? I'm being a little lazy. I'm trying to cut corners over here and not explain. Because I need a stick. Who has a stick? Who has the stick? Ariella, you brought the stick? She forgot it at home. What does that mean? You see, if the Be'er are the Jewish people, and the water that we give is the godliness that's our godly love, our excitement, our connection to Hashem. Today, by the way, in the morning, I learned Masechta Shabbos. So in the Gemara that I learned today, it happened to be, the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos that so-and-so says that if you go up the mountain of Carmel is one of the mountains in Israel. You go up the mountain of Carmel, next to the water, and you stand on the top, and you look out, you can see the Be'er of Miriam. What are you going to see? You're going to see a rock that has a bunch of holes in it. And that's the Be'er of Miriam that went along with the Jewish people. It was a holy rock. Why did it have holes? Because Moshe hit it. He smashed it open and got the one. But it says the hole, it has, you see a big rock with holes in it. It's the rock of Moshe. Miriam. And by the way, it's interesting. There was a question where the Jewish people went to the mikveh in the desert. What was the mikveh? What was their water? So it says that the Be'er was the mikveh. The Be'er of Miriam was the mikveh. But the question is it sometimes a mikveh is okay if it's mayim she'uvim, if it's still water. But if for certain tumas, for zav, and for certain things, you need a maya and water from the maya. You need water. Still water is not good. It has to be. So the Gemara refers to the Be'er Shel Miriam, this Be'er, as the only instance where we have a mayon. It's a spring that's metaltel, that moves from place to place, that's mobile. Usually a spring it has to be in one place. Can't move it because it's from the ground. But here, the water of the mikveh was called mayim chayim because it was coming from the earth, even though it was coming from the rock. And it's not called water that's in it's in a keli. It's not considered water that's in a vessel. It's a water it's not mayim shuvim inside the keli. It's interesting. But again, if the rock is metaphoric for what? For the Jewish people. So when we're saying who dug the rock, that means someone dug the Jewish people. So he explains like this. The fact that we're children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they made us vessels. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are considered three hands, 3 arms, because in the Torah it mentions 3 times Hashem's hands. Yad HaGedula, the great hand. Yad HaChazaka, the mighty hand. Yad Rama, the exalted hand. Who are these 3 hands? Avram Avinu, Abraham, is the personification of Yad HaGedula. Gedula is Chesed. Yitzchak is the personification of Yad HaChazaka, the strong hand. And Yaakov is Yad Rama, the exalted hand. To dig something, you need to use your hands. The Sarim, the ministers who dug the rock, are those who dug the Jewish people to be a vessel for godliness. Now, a similar idea that the rock is a vessel for godliness is also the concept that the Jewish people are called the Migdash. The Beis HaMikdash is, the 3 weeks now are connected to the 3 Batei Migdash. But regarding the Beis HaMikdash, we know there's a physical edifice, but the real Beis HaMikdash is the hearts of the people. Like it says, Va'asoli Migdash, make for me a Beis HaMikdash, V'shachanti, I will dwell b'socham. But in order for God to dwell in us, we have to be a vessel for Him. A vessel doesn't happen on its own. A vessel has to be made. Who makes the vessel? It says, Migdash Hashem, the Beis HaMikdash of Hashem, koinenu yadecha, that your hands establish. God's hands establish, Hashem's hands establish the Beis HaMikdash. Which hands are Hashem's hands? The same hands that dug out the well. He's basically going to say that the well and the Beis HaMikdash is the same idea. The Sela and the Be'er. The next explains, Migdash Hashem koinenu yadecha, the Beis HaMikdash of God that your hands established. Migdash, who is the Migdash? Koyal Nishmas Yisrael, is referring to the souls of Israel. Migdash, I will dwell in them. It doesn't say in it, I will dwell in the temple, I will dwell in them. Who is the them? Inside every single one of Israel. And they're called the Migdash. Now, what's the difference? Behold, the world was also created by God. What's the difference of the Beis HaMikdash being God's structure and the world? A very big difference. The worlds were created by God's hand, but through a process of concealment. The Beis Hamikdash was created through God's hands through a process of revelation. That's why the Beis Hamikdash is a vessel for divine revelation. The world is an obscuring on godliness. The Jewish souls are unlike the rest of the world. They're vessels for godliness to dwell in us. But in order to become a vessel, we have to be forged. So who forged the Jewish people? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the three hands that made the Beis Hamikdash. That's why we also have three Batei Mikdash. One for Moshe, for Avram, one for Yitzchak, and one for Yaakov. They're the master builders. But really it means they carved out our consciousness that we should be conditioned to be able to receive and hold godliness. That means on our own, we would never be able to be vessels for it. The concealments of the world would be too much. But because we have such ancestors, they dug out already this well. They were the well diggers. The hefer shebei migdash la'olam is between the Beis Hamikdash and the worlds. Hagam d'chsivus hashamayim v'sa'aretz ani molei. It says God fills the heaven and earth. So God is everywhere. So what's the difference in the Beis Hamikdash that God is? The answer is He's everywhere, but you can totally ignore Him. In the Beis Hamikdash, He was revealed. That's concealed. Beis Hamikdash Me'eh Begiloi is revealed because it's a keli. V'tzarech lahavin. V'tzarech liyas b'chinas keli. I'm sorry, you need to be a keli. Who made the Jewish people into a keli? The avos. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Hem gimel yados. These are the three hands. Yada Gdula, Yada Chazaka, Yada Rama. V'zeu Migdash Hashem konen yadecha. The Beis Hamikdash of God that your hands established. And so just like there is a Beis Hamikdash that's a vessel for godliness, in the midbar, in the desert, it manifested as the rock. But it wasn't just a regular rock. A regular rock is dry. This rock produced water. The waters are the waters of godliness. Who is the Be'er? Israel. Who dug the Be'er? Our fathers. V'zeu Be'er chafaru sarim. But it wasn't only the sarim, it was also the lawgiver also completed. Who actually brought the water out of the rock? That means got the water out of the well was Moshe. And that's why we continue b'mechokek, through the lawgivers, b'mishanoisam, through their stick. It's interesting. Even after Moshe hit the rock and got the waters, we're still singing that Moshe got us the water because we still appreciate that he brought the water out. Whatever he used, whatever it took to get it out, but he got it out. And what does that mean? What does Moshe bring us? Moshe brings us Torah. Through Torah, which is Moshe, we become a keli, a vessel for the dwelling of this light. Chulu, with this he concludes the Maimer. Okay, not bad. I didn't think we would manage at all over here today. And we did manage. Again, this still needs a little clarification. What does he want with the Makli situation? But as it's Hashem, thank you. Everybody be well.